It's time to learn how to sew. Let's make a stuffed animal. Okay, a few supplies that you will need to make a stuffed animal. We have some felt that we're going to use in the building, but if you don't have felt at home, an old t-shirt that you don't need, an old dress shirt, even an old pair of jeans that might have too many holes in them to wear to school, this would be a perfect thing to just cut up to make our project. The first thing you have to decide is what you're going to make. And to do that, we're going to take just a plain old piece of sketch paper and we're going to sketch out some ideas. I would start small till you get an idea of what you want to make. And then once you've figured it out, it's easy enough to make that larger to see just how you like it. And besides, sometimes you can draw something and you're not really happy with it. So you want to make sure you get the design that you want ahead of time. So I'm going to make this little guy that has like a crown. And I think that's a good shape. So now I'm going to take my paper and flip it over. And I know that this is how big my felt is going to be. So I want to make this guy as big as possible. It is a lot easier to sew something if it is a larger piece of fabric. If you're trying to sew something very tiny, it is often very difficult, especially if you're using something like felt because it's kind of big in the first place. It's just harder to sew if it's small. I changed my design a little bit, but that's okay. That's why we sketch. Now that I've got my good design and I know how I want this guy to be, I am going to use a regular scissors to cut out the piece of paper. I am saying it in that way as a reminder for the next step. You're going to need regular scissors for this project and fabric scissors. Now here in the building, of course, we have fabric scissors. If you don't have fabric scissors at home, that's okay. You will just reuse your regular scissors. But you will probably need to cut a little more slowly and carefully because a regular scissors that you use when you're cutting out a piece of paper does not cut fabric that well. Fabric scissors is very sharp and mainly just used for fabric because it stays really sharp. If you cut something else with a fabric scissors, a lot of times it doesn't get very sharp or it doesn't stay very sharp, and your mom or grandma will have a heart attack because you've just cut something with the fabric scissors that you should not have cut. It just dulls them and you don't want to do that. So to make my little stuffed animal, I'm going to need two sides. If you remember the trick to cutting eyeballs when we used colored paper, you should remember that if you put two pieces together, then you will get two of the same shape, which is what we want to do for our project. It does not have to be two of the same color. You can do two separate colors. That's not a problem. I'm going to take some pins out of my cute little pin cushion, and I'm going to hold my project in place with these little stick pins. If you pick up the project and the fabric underneath, you're going to place the pin into the fabric and have it come out the back just a bit. And then I want you to tilt it, and I want you to bend this part of the fabric over so that when you push the pin farther, it actually comes out and it's going to hold all of our pieces together. See how it's in the center of the fabric there also? I'm going to pin it down 2 or 3 places. So go straight down, bend the fabric a little bit, and then push the pin the rest of the way through. Go slowly so you don't poke yourself, please. In, poke it through. And that will hold my project in place just for a couple minutes while I cut the fabric out. So I'm going to cut in time lapse so you don't have to watch me. Now that we've cut out our design, you can remove your pins. And you have 2 sides of your design. Ta-da! 2 sides. Save all your scraps. These work great for adding details like colors around the eye or adding any of the other kind of decorative details to your projects that you like. So there is a dedicated scrap box for these in the art room. You'll have to find those to put your scraps away. If you don't have a scrap box at home, why don't you start creating one? You never know when these kinds of things could come in handy for another project. All right, next I want to add an eyeball to my project. I can add one or maybe two. Let's just do two eyeballs for this one. You'll need another piece of fabric. I've got some white right here. Please, if you have a large piece of white, do not make a tiny little hole in the center to make eyeballs. Try to go to the edge and save them as much material as possible. We definitely don't want to be that person who cuts a hole in the center of a piece of paper or a piece of fabric, and then no one else can use it for anything else. So I'm just going to cut mine right here around the edge. And of course I held that two at a time, so I have two pieces, just like we have been taught before. Now I have two eyeballs. If you looked at this little monster, you can see he has an extra ring of color around his eyeball. I also gave him a nice little extra colored pupil. That would be a wonderful idea for you if that's something you're interested in. I actually found these little foam leaves. I'm not sure what they were used for. It looked like maybe they were used for threading or beading onto something, so I thought maybe that would be good to add to my eyeballs. And that could be a cute little octopus eyeball. Alright, to sew these in place, we need to learn how to thread a needle, and that can be some of the trickiest things that you do when you're working in fabric. We've got just a small piece of string here. This is sewing thread. This is just dual purpose cotton sewing thread. You can buy rolls of this at Walmart. Actually, it's not cotton. It looks like it's polyester covered polyester. Okay, so it's polyester thread. But anyhow, cut a piece about the length of your arm. You don't want to make it too much longer because it is kind of difficult to deal with a long piece of string or piece of thread when you're sewing. I've got a sewing needle here that has a larger eye. Let's see how close I can bring this to the camera for you to see. Can you see the little eye on my sewing needle? There we go. So what I'm going to do with my thread is I'm going to put it through that eye. For me, it's easy because the thread is very skinny and the eye is relatively big, so it's not too much problem to try and get that threaded. There, we got a nice focus. So I'm going to thread that through there, and then I'm going to take my thread, my string, and I'm going to take one end and go all the way back to the other end. And I'm going to double it. So if I hold these two pieces together, I'm going to wrap it around my finger. And where that overlap happens, I wrapped it around my finger and created this loop. I'm going to take the tail ends of the loop and I'm going to stick them through so that I get a knot. Let's try that again. I'm going to loop around. I'm going to stick the tail underneath. And now I'm going to get a knot. See how it's starting to create a knot? I want to do that 2 or 3 times. And I want to try and aim so that knot always finds its way right on top of the previous one. That will give it a nice thick knot and it won't pull through whatever fabric you're using. There's a nice thick knot. Alright, now it's time for me to start sewing. Let's give this guy another pupil. I'm not sure I'm really crazy about the green circles around his eyes, so I'm going to skip those. I'm just going to give him an orange pupil instead. Maybe just one. How's that? Yeah, that might work. So I'll take this little orange piece of felt and I'm going to put it on top of my white piece of felt. And I'm going to take my newly threaded needle and I'm going to sew the two together. How do I do that? Well, I start on the bottom of my project because I don't want my knot to be shown later. So I'll start on my bottom of my project and I'm going to go up through both layers. And then I will pull it through. And now I'm going to go back down through both layers and I'll pull it back. And I will continue this around the circle of the pupil until it will not come off. There are many different kinds of stitches. If you decide that you are going to get more interested in sewing and you want to try to do something a little fancier with your stitching, then I would suggest that you look ahead to different kinds of embroidery stitches, because you can do some really cool things. This is a standard straight stitch. See how you have these little straight lines? This one is called a whip stitch, where you go around the piece of fabric. There are many different ways of sewing, and it's not really as complicated as sometimes people make it out to be. You could easily sew a pair of pants if you had a split in the seam. You could easily sew back on a button, and all of those things we're going to learn while we do this project. So this will hopefully help you later in life. You could be that person who helps their buddies when they split their pants after gym class or whatever. All right, so I've got this guy sewn on here, and it's not going to come off. Now, how do I sew him back on the big piece of fabric? You're going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to go down, because my thread is ended underneath. See how my thread is ended underneath there? I'm just going to go down through the middle of that. And I'm going to start the same way I did before. I'm going to come up the back. Let's do that whip stitch this time. This time when I sew, I'm going to go into my lower layer of fabric, and I'm going to bring it up through both layers. And I will get the thread to go around the edge. So I'm going to go into the lower layer. I'm going to bend it up so it comes through both on the front. And I will continue that all the way around until my eyeball is sewn in place. How about we add a mouth? We'll take some of our scrap purple here. We got a cute little mouth. Let's do the rest of this eyeball. I think we need some teeth. And you're going to sew all of these individual pieces on one at a time, just like you did when we sewed on the pupil for that original eye. Plan out all the things that you're going to add to your project before you start sewing anything together, and definitely before you start adding the back part of your monster and or stuffed animal. We want to add all of these detail-y parts before we add the back part of your animal. It's hard to sew on the inside of something if you've got the back on it. So let's just sew these all together in time lapse so you don't have to watch it in real time. Okay, before I go too much farther in sewing any more of this, let's talk about how to tie a knot. So when I want to tie a knot on the back, I am going to slide the needle under the last stitch. So you can see this little stitch that I have right here. I'm going to put the needle right underneath it, but I'm not going to pull it all the way through. And you can see how my thread has a little extra space in here. This is where I want to put my needle when I'm finished pulling it. So I'm going to pull it part way through, and then I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to try to tuck it underneath that piece. Let's tuck it underneath with the tail end. There we go. So let's see that once again. Okay, so go under your stitch. I'm going to back it up in through that loop that I created. And I'm going to pull it back out. And that will give us a nice tight knot right here. And we don't have to worry about our thread pulling through the back when we're finished. When you clip it, make sure that you don't clip it too close to that knot because it can unravel on you too. All right, let's keep sewing this guy together. Let's look at knot tying one more time. Go under the stitch. Bring your needle back into the loop of thread that you created. Give it a tug. Do that again. Under the stitch. Back through the loop. And then trim it.